I thought this was interesting. Slavoj Žižek wrote an op-ed in The Guardian last week around Russia's invasion of Ukraine. He came out pretty strong in support of arming Ukraine. And I thought it'd be interesting to go over this and see what his reasoning is, because he's a very smart guy, obviously. And he's a European. He's from Slovakia. And he's a leftist. So this is a real leftist supporting the arming of Ukraine, which has been basically one of the main points of disagreement between leftists on this particular issue. Like, should we arm Ukraine or not? Obviously, Noam Chomsky has come out very strongly against arming Ukraine. There is a point. Chomsky does have a point. Like, does it really matter to the people of Ukraine who their fucking government is? Like, does it matter if it's Zelensky or Putin? Not really, at the end of the day.
Yeah, probably not. Probably not.
But let's see what Žižek has to say, because this is a recent piece from him. He's a very good writer, and his opinions are usually pretty strong and pretty good, well reasoned out. So let's take a look here. I'm just going to read a little bit of a few excerpts of this to get the general idea of it. I'm not going to do a Žižek accent. That'd be horrific. I would not subject my listeners to that. To insist on full sovereignty in the face of global warming is sheer madness, since our very survival hinges on tight global cooperation. But Russia doesn't simply ignore global warming. Why was it so mad at the Scandinavian countries when they expressed their intention to join NATO? With global warming, what is at stake is the control of the Arctic Passage. Parenthetically here, that's why Trump wanted to buy Greenland from Denmark. Due to the explosive development of China, Japan, and South Korea, the main transport route will run north of Russia and Scandinavia. Russia's strategic plan is to profit from global warming, control the world's main transport route, plus develop Siberia and control Ukraine. In this way, Russia will dominate so much food production that it will be able to blackmail the whole world. This is the ultimate economic reality beneath Putin's imperial dream. So he's making the point that he feels like Putin is interested in that northern passage and is thinking long-term strategically, which of course he is. That's what Putin does, man. He's KGB.
Sure, yeah, he's a chess player too, isn't he?
I'm sure. Yeah, everybody in Russia they learn chess in school.
Yeah, well, I guess there's been an ongoing conflict in the Arctic Circle in particular about large sections of the Arctic that Russia's laid claim to, and then I think other countries, well, I guess Greenland also, but there's, I guess, huge oil reserves under the ice sheets up there, and I guess there are cynical people that are waiting for the ice sheets to melt so that they can get up there and start pumping these trillions of dollars of oil out from underneath the Arctic. It's a huge economic boon to whomever will be able to control that region.
The oil backs the war machine, and the war machine, it cares about getting more oil. It's a downward death spiral for the entire planet. While some leftists claim that the ongoing war is in the interest of the NATO industrial military complex, which uses the need for new arms to avoid crisis and gain new profits, their true message to Ukraine is, okay, you are victims of a brutal aggression, but do not rely on our arms, because in this way, you play in the hands of the industrial military complex. Basically, making the point that to argue against arming Ukraine is to say Ukraine, to tell them basically, to arm you would be bad because it finances the military-industrial complex. And this is the point I've always made on this issue. I've went back and forth on this a million times in my head, like what's the right way to go here morally? But in order to arm Ukraine, you have to buy arms from fucking Lockheed Martin. You have to pump more money into the military-industrial complex. That's why it's morally questionable in my view. Continuing on here, the disorientation caused by the Ukrainian war is producing strange bedfellows like Henry Kissinger and Noam Chomsky. But when it comes to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, both recently advocated for Ukraine to consider a settlement that could see it dropping claim to some land to achieve a quicker peace deal. In short, the two stand for the same version of, quote, pacifism, which only works if we neglect the key fact that the war is not about Ukraine, but a moment of the brutal attempt to change our entire geopolitical situation. The true target of the war is the dismantlement of the European unity, advocated not only by the U.S. conservatives and Russia, but also by the European extreme right and left. At this point, in France, Mélenchon meets Le Pen. The craziest notion floating around these days is that, to counter the new polarity between the U.S. and China, which stand for the excesses of Western liberalism and Oriental authoritarianism, Europe and Russia should rejoin forces and form a third Eurasian bloc based on the Christian legacy purified of its liberal excess. The very idea of a Eurasian third way is a form of today's fascism. he's a European, obviously. These concepts are sort of foreign to Americans, but he sees European unity as distinct from what people like Putin and Trump are pushing for. And he's arguing that Kissinger and Chomsky are also supporting this sort of new third wave fascism in Europe.
So, all right, I'm sorry, I just want to...
The true target of the war is the dismantlement of the European unity, advocated not only by the U.S. conservatives and Russia, but also by the European extreme right and left.
He's saying the target per Putin's target is the dismantle. Okay.
He's saying the conservatives like Trump are supporting Russia in this war because Russia's aim is to break up European unity. And in order to maintain American dominance, they need to keep Europe divided.
I don't know. Is that what...
It's a way to sort of draw a distinction between the old bipolar world of the Soviet Union and the United States dominating, and now a potential third, and let's not even ignore China. We can ignore China for now, but a third potential player in the world, the European Union, and Russia and the United States both have interests in seeing that divided. And this could be why conservatives in England, for example, with the withdrawal of England from the Eurozone, man, and conservatives in the United States supported that also.
Yeah, I don't know. Do you think that that's what the U.S. conservatives and the right-wing conservatives, or the British conservatives, had on their minds when they voted for Brexit? That it was part of a larger long-term strategy to destabilize Europe as a competitor to the U.S.? I don't know. Like I see how the argument could be made, but I don't know. Like I don't see why the U.S. would pursue something like that. Whereas, is it really going to be that detrimental to the U.S. to have Europe be a large economic bloc? I mean, it already is, and it.
Yes, I think it is.
It seems to function fine with what the U.S. is trying to do. I mean, I don't seem to really be at odds on anything.
Well, not countries like France and Germany. Well, France and England primarily, that are vassal states essentially since the Marshall Plan. But there definitely is a potential reason why the neocons would not want Eastern Europe to unite with Western Europe and form a large trading bloc and military bloc that is a direct competitor to the United States. Because Eastern Europe has interests in Asia as well. These countries are supposed to be baby Americas. They're not supposed to be uniting in opposition to us.
Yeah, I don't know. I wonder if they're uniting in opposition to us, or I don't know. I mean, this is obviously like super deep,
conservatives,
four-dimensional Henry Kissinger's type global chess, and I really just don't know much about it. But I don't know why it couldn't just be that the U.S. wants to support Europe being a large. I mean, we already have a lot of sway over the European Union. Why not allow them to pursue being a larger economic bloc, and then we just profit off that? They start generating more revenue, have more power, and then we have that power by proxy by having the power over them initially or already.
Well, I think what he's saying is the reason that conservatives in this country have been so supportive of Russia's invasion of Ukraine is for that reason, because it's better for our interests if Eastern Europe is subjugated to Russia than if Eastern Europe is united with Western Europe. And obviously, Žižek is a European. This is a sort of Eurocentric point of view he's coming from here. But it's just a different take, and it's interesting to see where he's coming from.
Sure, yeah.
A little bit more here. When a country is occupied, it is the ruling class which is usually bribed to collaborate with the occupiers to maintain its privileged position, so that the struggle against the occupiers becomes a priority. The same can go for the struggle against racism. In a state of racial tension and exploitation, the only way to effectively struggle for the working class is to focus on fighting racism. This is why any appeal to the white working class, as in today's alt-right populism, betrays class struggle. And I just want to say this is a brilliant point by Žižek here. I would love to see Chomsky's response to this. This is a very well thought out point here. He's basically saying that opposition to occupation is paramount for the left, in particular in Ukraine in this particular instance, in time and history, because the occupiers and the elites of the country will work together against the working class. And this is his main point here.
Yeah, that seems to be pretty historically justified, that statement. The wealthy, the business class, they're not really concerned with who they're selling their wares to. I know what was it? I don't want to talk out of term, not being able to back up what I'm saying, but there was a lot of major industries in France and Holland when the Nazis come in that
Sure.
just thrived under it. And it was the same people that owned the remember. I used to know the names of them. But yeah, you know, it's the same people that own the businesses, but the Nazis come in and the Nazis like, hey, we'll just give you these insane contracts because we want to keep the business going. We want to keep this region having some economic power, and you know, we want to make you happy. We want to make the wealthy people that have sway in the country happy. So it seems like the wealthy always turn out pretty well.
I don't know any specific details about this, but I'm sure this is always the case. I know Poland, this was the case. Even in Ukraine, this was the case. There's collaborators every time. The elites always collaborate with the occupying force. They don't care who the government is because the government is subjugated to them.
Yeah.
All right, continuing on. Today, one cannot be a leftist if one does not unequivocally stand behind Ukraine. To be a leftist who shows understanding for Russia is like to be one of those leftists who, before Germany attacked the Soviet Union, took seriously German anti-imperialist rhetoric directed at the UK and advocated neutrality in the war of Germany against France and the UK. So he's comparing Russia's invasion of Ukraine to Nazi invasions in Europe.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Well, we were neutral. I mean, the United States was neutral. We didn't arm France.
Yeah, and I think it was kind of a blight on our reputation at the time that we didn't get involved earlier. I mean, I guess there wasn't the big part of it was there just wasn't any public will in the U.S. But
well, a lot of our elites openly supported the Nazis and their fascism.
Shout out to Henry Ford
and Walt Disney.
Yeah,
it's a good point. I don't see the struggle I have is comparing the Nazis to the Russians. I don't think they're equivalent. Obviously, they're not morally equivalent in the way they operate their societies. Although there's similarities, there's not. Obviously, it's just not as bad. It's not that bad.
Yeah, I mean, it
still sucks.
It's
still fascist.
I mean,
but
the outcomes of the occupation are different, but the initial justification for going in is just conquest, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's no different than what the Nazis were doing.
Sure.
Hopefully I don't think there's any concentration camps showing up in Ukraine, but their initial motivations are exactly the same. So I buy it.
On the day I am writing this, we learned from the media that WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange's extradition to the U.S. has been approved by the UK Home Secretary Priti Patel. His crime? Nothing other than to render public the crimes confessed by Bush's slip of the tongue. The documents revealed by WikiLeaks revealed how, under Bush's presidency, the U.S. military had killed hundreds of civilians in unreported incidents during the war in Afghanistan, while leaked Iraq war files showed 66,000 civilians had been killed and prisoners tortured. Crimes fully comparable with what Putin is doing in Ukraine. From today's hindsight, we can say that WikiLeaks disclosed dozens of American Buchas and Mariupols. So while putting Bush on trial is no less illusory than bringing Putin to the Hague tribunal, the minimum to be done by those who oppose Russia's invasion of Ukraine is to demand Assange's immediate release. Ukraine claims it fights for Europe, and Russia claims it fights for the rest of the world against Western unipolar hegemony. Both claims should be rejected, and here the difference between right and left enters the stage. From the rightist standpoint, Ukraine fights for European values against the non-European authoritarians. From the leftist standpoint, Ukraine fights for global freedom, inclusive of the freedom of Russians themselves. That's why the heart of every true Russian patriot beats for Ukraine. Nicely tied up at the end there. Žižek's a great writer. I'm not sure he brings Assange into this almost for no reason, but it is topical, obviously, with his extradition to the United States impending here. So I don't know. I thought this was a well-written piece.
No, it definitely is.
Makes a pretty strong case for arming Ukraine. He doesn't address. I mean, he addresses the points, but he doesn't go into too much detail.
Is that what Russia is claiming? Is that it's fighting against the kind of Western unipolar hegemony?
Yeah, that's basically it.
I don't know. I'm sure that's part of it, but I haven't heard them make that claim. I mean, I think it was just my understanding is they were just claiming that it was a territorial dispute, or they were. Well, no, obviously they were denazifying.
This is a direct response to the coup. So the United States backed the Revolution of Dignity, the Maidan protests, and the ousting of Viktor Yanukovych. He was democratically elected, and then the Maidan Revolution basically forced him out of the country. He's in exile in Russia. He was in talks to join the European Trade Partnership to sign a deal with the European Union. He wound up backing out of that. and instead opting for an agreement with Russia and the Eastern Bloc, the new Eastern Bloc trade that Russia is orchestrating over there. And the protests erupted in mostly Western Ukraine and Kiev. There were snipers that were shooting protesters that were traced to Ukrainian security forces working for Yanukovych, although there was no direct evidence that he ordered these snipers. It's really unclear. It could have been CIA. It could have been Yanukovych. It could have been Putin. It could have been lots of people. Who knows? But anyway, Yanukovych was democratically elected, and the United States did support these protests. Now, whether or not they had forces on the ground encouraging the protests, nobody really knows. There were Azov battalion members in the streets pretty heavily there that you can see video footage of. Complicated situation, but yeah, Russia is pissed off basically because Yanukovych, they call this a coup. Yanukovych was elected. Of course, so was Zelensky. Yeah. Zelensky was elected also. And supposedly Yanukovych ran on a platform of more close integration with Europe. It's a situation like the United States. Like the cities are mostly liberal and the rural areas are mostly conservative. It's very similar in Ukraine.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's just another country where the proxy war between the U.S. and Russia is played out as it has for decades now. I mean, yeah, I don't know. That doesn't surprise me. I was just, I don't know. My question was what their stated goals. If that's what, obviously the political chess power games is always at hand whenever you're having something like this go on. I just didn't know if it had been made public, if they were openly saying that, yes, this has to do with the power struggle we've had with the U.S. for however many decades, or if they were just saying that, this is territorial gains, or we're trying to liberate the peoples that are part of a Ukraine that they don't want to be a part of. It's the people in the Donbass region.
Well, there were laws enacted after the Maidan. There were anti-Russian laws enacted. Like, there was some anti-Russian sentiment in the country. Mm-hmm. That's not justification for a fucking war, obviously.
I don't know. Whenever I end up finding myself disagreeing with somebody's take on Ukraine, it's because they're trying to simplify it. They're saying it's about this, or it's about conservative forces in the country are in favor of it. Okay, so what? The U.S. arms producers are going to make money off of it. Yeah, that sucks. Okay, I don't know.
That's not a direct refutation of. Yeah, that's not a good argument against supporting Ukraine, right?
You have to look at everything in its totality, and I don't know. For me, I've said this before. I think it's morally justifiable, not necessarily to save lives, because I don't think it would. I think if Russia had come in and annexed the territory, things would have went back to normal fairly quick for whether it be Eastern Ukraine or the whole of Ukraine. I think it needs to be fought just for the precedent, for setting a standard for how the world is going to function going forward. And hopefully, we're certainly not innocent by any means, but at a certain point, like, maybe we could start setting the precedent that the U.S. is going to take the right side and going to uphold good liberal values kind of going forward into the future. Maybe that our imperialist and what's the word I'm looking for?
Evil.
Just evil. Our evil way past, maybe we're trying to move past them. I don't think that's what's going on with the U.S. No. I think they're making a very cold and calculated decision based on power dynamics and all that, but I'm okay with it based on principles of sovereignty.
Yeah, sovereignty is a big one. And not even national sovereignty, fuck national sovereignty, but just the sovereignty of a group of people to defend themselves from oppressors, I think is important. It needs to be upheld. Obviously, the United States, I think the State Department people are the same people who are on the boards of directors of Lockheed Martin. The capitalist interests in this country are the same as the government interests in this country. There's no distinction, really. Yeah. So that's worth bearing in mind as far as the United States goes. But yeah, I'm so torn on this one. I think it just sucks to order weapons. It sucks to buy this much fucking weapons and just give them to people willing. Like, it sucks, dude. Like, based on your point of view and your argumentation, your line of reasoning, wouldn't it be justified to send troops to Ukraine?
Yeah, I mean, potentially. I think you still have to do the pragmatic math. I think the moral math should supersede the pragmatic math in most cases, but just the simple pragmatic effect of that is if we did send troops there, then we're looking at World War III, and overall, as bad as it would be to allow imperialistic countries to go in and take land by conquest, I think it would be, and to allow that precedent, I think it would be worse to have a nuclear war. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that.
It's good that there is a leftist out there, mainstream, very popular leftist who is supporting sending arms to Ukraine. It makes me feel a little better, I guess, about what's going on.
I remember hearing about Chomsky's take, and yeah, I didn't. It kind of struck me the wrong way. It seems to be though
people take it out of context. People were taking it out of context.
Maybe I did.
He didn't say that he doesn't support sending arms to Ukraine. He just couched it in a bunch of he wants stipulations put on the arms, like they don't go to Nazis, for example, or we know where they're, like, for example, these huge fucking artillery batteries. We want to know where they are. We want to keep track of them. We don't want to form a new mujahideen in Ukraine, essentially, is what his argument was.
Yeah, that's very reasonable. I guess on a side note, I don't get the Azov battalion and them being constantly called Nazis. I've read up on them. What's the fear around that? Like, there's certainly a nationalistic right wing of the Ukrainian military, but I don't think are there any they're not like planning Kristallnacht. They're not going to do anything. Yeah, I mean, you have that in militaries everywhere. There's a certain subsection of the U.S. military that are going to be incredibly right-wing, nationalistic, white supremacist.
They had like 3 or 4 members of parliament that were Azov Battalion open Nazis. Imagine if we had open Nazis in the fucking House of Representatives, dude.
What does that mean, open Nazis? Like, what does that mean?
They supported a Nazi a sympathizer. He was one of these guys who worked for the Nazis during the occupation of Ukraine.
Okay. I mean, but like, was he going to do something, or did they just like...
Yeah, he fucking massacred Jews and shit. He massacred Slavs and Jews. He helped with the Holocaust.
So is that the worry? Like, if we give them money and arms, they're going to massacre Jews? Like, I don't know. This is like, honestly, I'm trying to figure out what the worry is. And I read up on the Azov battalion, and they certainly have some, repugnant ideals, but the actions that they're trying to take, like, I'm not aware of what actions they're planning on taking if they get power. They just seem like a bunch of crazy right wingers in the military, which seems pretty par for the course for for militaries in general. They're made up of kind of crazy nationalistic right wingers.
Well, I would say 2 things in response to that. First thing I would say is there's a lot of problems with, for example, I wouldn't send Stinger missiles to the Proud Boys, for example. Number 2, I do support the idea of sending all Nazis to the front lines of every war. If anybody dies first, it should be Nazis.
Hungary and so on, West Berlin and so on, Ukraine and so on and so on. Racist cliches and so on, choice and so on, binary logic and so on.